Daniel Forster sat alone in his darkened living room, the only light coming from his phone screen, and the dim glow of the city filtering through the curtains. At 38, he felt decades older, worn down by the weight of single parenthood and a grief that refused to loosen its grip. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as tears blurred his vision. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us how unexpected moments can transform our lives forever. Tonight had been particularly brutal. Ruby's school had hosted a mother-daughter art night, and watching his 8-year-old daughter sit alone at her table while other children worked alongside their mothers had torn something open inside him. Ruby had been brave, painting a beautiful sunset scene by herself. But when they got home, she'd broken down completely. Daniel had held her as she sobbed into his chest, clutching the framed photograph of Grace, her mother, who had been taken from them 3 years ago in a car accident. The pain in his daughter's cries had mirrored the agony in his own heart, and after finally getting Ruby to sleep, he'd collapsed onto the couch, emotionally drained and desperately lonely. For the past 3 years, Daniel had found an odd comfort in texting Grace's old phone number. He knew the messages went nowhere, that some stranger probably had that number now, but it helped him feel connected to her somehow. On the hardest nights, when the silence of the house became unbearable, he would pour his heart out into those texts, pretending she could somehow still receive them. Tonight was one of those nights. His thumbs moved across the screen almost automatically as he typed out his pain. I miss you so much it physically hurts. Ruby needed you tonight, and I don't know how to be enough for her. I'm drowning here. Grace, I need you. He hit send without thinking, then set the phone down on the coffee table and rubbed his face with both hands. The exhaustion was overwhelming, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual. Every day felt like climbing a mountain with no summit in sight. Then his phone buzzed, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Daniel's heart stuttered. In 3 years of sending messages to Grace's old number, he had never once received a response. He grabbed the phone, expecting spam or a wrong number reply, but what he saw made his blood run cold. The messages weren't from Grace's number. They were from Victoria Ashford, his boss. Victoria Ashford, the formidable CEO of Ashford Architecture, the woman who had built one of the most respected firms in the city through sheer determination and an iron will. Victoria, who never smiled in meetings, who expected perfection from her senior architects, who had a reputation for making grown men nervous with a single glance. Daniel's stomach dropped as he scrolled up to see what he'd sent. Horror washed over him in waves as he realized his mistake. In his grief-stricken state, he must have scrolled too far in his contacts and tapped on his most recent work conversation instead of Grace's saved number. The messages from Victoria read, "Daniel, is everything all right? That message seems concerning. Daniel, please respond. I'm worried about you." His hands shook as he tried to formulate a response. This was a disaster. Victoria was his boss, not his friend. They had a strictly professional relationship. Sure, she'd been understanding about his situation as a single parent, allowing him flexible hours when Ruby was sick or had school events. But they never discussed personal matters. He couldn't remember ever having a conversation with her that wasn't about blueprints, client meetings, or project deadlines. Frantically, he typed, "Victoria, I am so deeply sorry. That message was absolutely not intended for you. Please disregard it completely. I apologize for the confusion. See you Monday." He hit send and immediately wanted to throw his phone across the room. Could he have sounded more stiff and formal? But what else could he say? The damage was done. 3 dots appeared, indicating Victoria was typing. They disappeared, appeared again, disappeared. Daniel's anxiety climbed with each cycle. Finally, a message came through. Who was it meant for? Daniel closed his eyes. Lying would only make things worse, but the truth was humiliating. Still, Victoria deserved honesty after he dragged her into his emotional breakdown. With trembling fingers, he typed, "My late wife's old number. Sometimes I still text it when things get difficult. Tonight was rough with Ruby. Again, I sincerely apologize for involving you in this. The response took longer this time. Daniel imagined Victoria sitting in her pristine downtown apartment, probably still dressed in one of her impeccable business suits, even on a Friday night, wondering how to handle her emotionally unstable employee. She was probably already drafting the HR email in her mind when her message finally came. It surprised him. No need to apologize, Daniel. Grief has no timeline and no rules. Take care of yourself and Ruby. We'll speak Monday, if you'd like. Daniel exhaled deeply, relief flooding through him. Professional, kind, exactly what he should have expected from Victoria, who despite her stern exterior, had always been fair. By Monday, this would be forgotten. Just an awkward moment they'd both pretend never happened. He checked on Ruby one more time, watching her sleep peacefully with Grace's photo on her nightstand, then returned to the living room. He needed to sleep, to let this horrifying night end, but his mind kept replaying the mortifying exchange. Of all the people he could have accidentally texted, why did it have to be Victoria Ashford? Daniel finally fell into a restless sleep on the couch around 2 in the morning, his phone clutched in his hand. He dreamed of Grace, of happier times, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. When his doorbell rang at 10:30 the next morning, he assumed it was a package delivery. Ruby was in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, working on a history poster that was due Monday. Daniel shuffled to the door in his worn t-shirt and sweatpants, hair disheveled, eyes still heavy with exhaustion. He opened the door and froze completely. Victoria Ashford stood on his porch, and she looked nothing like the woman he saw every day at the office. Gone was the severe black suit, the tightly pulled back hair, the austere expression. Instead, she wore dark jeans and a soft cream sweater, her auburn hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She held a cardboard carrier with 2 coffee cups and what appeared to be a hot chocolate. "Good morning, Daniel," she said with a gentle smile he'd never seen before. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I thought you might need some coffee, and perhaps some company." Daniel stood speechless, his brain struggling to process the surreal scene before him. Victoria Ashford, his intimidating boss, was standing on his doorstep on a Saturday morning with coffee, looking completely unlike herself. "Victoria," he finally managed, his voice hoarse from sleep. "What are you doing here?" Before she could answer, Ruby appeared behind him, curiosity drawing her from her school project. "Daddy, who is it?" She peered around his legs and looked up at Victoria with wide eyes. "Are you my daddy's boss? The one who makes him work late sometimes?" Victoria's expression softened in a way Daniel had never witnessed. She knelt down to Ruby's eye level, balancing the drink carrier carefully. "I am, sweetheart, and I am very sorry about those late nights. Maybe I can make it up to you both today. What are you working on?" Ruby's face brightened instantly. "I'm making a poster about ancient Egypt." "Do you know about pyramids?" "I know quite a bit actually," Victoria replied warmly. "I studied architectural history in college, and Egyptian architecture is fascinating. Would you like some help?" Daniel watched in stunned silence as his daughter grabbed Victoria's free hand and pulled her into the house, chattering excitedly about pharaohs and mummies. Victoria glanced back at him with an amused expression, and he realized he was still standing at the open door like a statue. He closed it slowly and followed them into the kitchen, where Victoria was already setting down the drinks and examining Ruby's scattered poster materials with genuine interest. She handed him one of the coffees, and their fingers brushed briefly. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through him. "You really didn't have to come here," he said quietly as Ruby gathered her markers and pictures. "This is beyond anything expected." Victoria turned to face him fully, her hazel eyes meeting his with unexpected vulnerability. "I know I didn't have to, Daniel, but your message last night, it resonated with me in ways I didn't expect." She paused, glancing at Ruby, then continued in a lower voice. "Sometimes we all need someone to show up, even when we don't ask for it." The next 2 hours unfolded like something from an alternate reality. Victoria Ashford the woman who commanded boardrooms and made experienced architects second-guess their designs, sat at Daniel's cluttered kitchen table, helping an 8-year-old girl glue pictures of pyramids onto poster board. Her laughter filled the house, genuine and unguarded, as Ruby explained her theory about how aliens must have helped build the Sphinx. Daniel found himself watching from the kitchen counter, ostensibly making sandwiches for lunch, but mostly observing this impossible scene. Victoria was patient, encouraging, and surprisingly knowledgeable about ancient Egyptian construction techniques. She explained to Ruby how the pyramids were aligned with celestial bodies, using salt and pepper shakers to demonstrate the concept of astronomical orientation. So the ancient Egyptians were like really smart architects, Ruby concluded, applying glitter to her pyramid drawing with enthusiastic abandon. Exactly like really smart architects, Victoria agreed, carefully avoiding the glitter explosion zone. In fact, some of the mathematical principles they used are still relevant in modern architecture today. Is that what you and Daddy do? Build things using old Egyptian math? Victoria glanced at Daniel with a smile that made his heart skip unexpectedly. Something like that. Your dad is actually one of the most talented architects I've ever worked with. He has a gift for understanding how spaces make people feel. Ruby beamed with pride. Daddy designed our house. Well, he didn't build it, but he drew all the pictures of what it should look like before Mama died. She said it every day. We live in a dream Daddy drew. The casual mention of Grace hung in the air for a moment. Daniel tensed, waiting for the awkwardness that usually followed when Ruby talked about her mother in front of others. People never knew how to respond, and their discomfort always made the moment worse. But Victoria didn't flinch or change the subject. Instead, she set down the glue stick and gave Ruby her full attention. Your mama was right. Living in a space that someone who loves you designed is very special. What was your favorite part that your daddy created? Ruby thought for a moment, tapping her chin with a marker-stained finger. The reading nook in my room. It has a window that looks at the stars, and Mama used to sit there with me every night and read stories. Now Daddy sits there with me, but sometimes he falls asleep because he's always tired. I bet those are still special times though, Victoria said gently. Even when Daddy falls asleep. Ruby nodded enthusiastically. I cover him with my blanket, and he makes funny snoring sounds. Daniel felt his face flush with embarrassment, but Victoria laughed warmly. That's very sweet of you to take care of him. Over lunch, Ruby dominated the conversation with questions about Victoria's work, her house, whether she had any pets, and why she wasn't married. Daniel nearly choked on his sandwich at that last question, but Victoria handled it with grace. I was married once, she told Ruby, her voice gentle but clear. My husband's name was Thomas, and he was wonderful, but he got very sick, and he died 5 years ago. Ruby's expression turned serious, the way children's faces do when they recognize shared pain. Like my mama in the car accident. Yes, sweetheart. Like your mama. Do you miss him every day? Victoria's eyes glistened slightly, but she maintained her composure. Every single day. But do you want to know something I learned? Ruby nodded eagerly. Missing someone doesn't mean we stop living our lives. It means we carry them with us in our hearts while we keep moving forward. And sometimes, when we're very lucky, we find new people who help us remember how to smile again. Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest at those words. He looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and saw not his formidable boss, but a woman who understood his pain intimately because she had walked the same dark path. After lunch, Ruby asked if she could show Victoria her room, specifically the reading nook Daniel had designed. As they disappeared upstairs, Daniel began cleaning up the kitchen, his mind reeling from the morning's events. When Victoria returned alone a few minutes later, she found him standing at the sink, hands braced against the counter, head bowed. Ruby's organizing her rock collection to show me, Victoria said softly, approaching him carefully. She said it might take a few minutes because she has to arrange them by color first, then by size, then by how smooth they feel. Daniel huffed a small laugh despite himself. That sounds like Ruby. She has a system for everything. Victoria leaned against the counter beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and elegant. Daniel, are you okay? He turned to face her, and suddenly the words came tumbling out. Why did you come here today? I mean, really, you barely know me outside of work. You have every right to think I'm unstable or unprofessional after that message. You could have just ignored it, or sent a polite response and left it at that. So why are you in my kitchen, helping my daughter with her homework? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hazel eyes searching his face. When I got your text last night, she began slowly. I was sitting in my apartment, alone as usual, going through project files on a Friday night, because that's what I do now. Work, always work. It's been 5 years since Thomas died, and I've convinced myself that staying busy means I'm healing. She paused, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the counter. But your message, the raw honesty in it, it shattered something inside me. It reminded me that I'm not the only person walking around with this weight, that grief isn't something we get over. It's something we learn to carry, and I realized that I've been carrying mine completely alone, by choice, because it seemed safer than letting anyone see the cracks. Victoria looked up at him, vulnerability written across her features. So I came here because when I saw your pain, I recognized it as my own. I came because I've been where you are, sitting in the dark, texting someone who can't answer back, drowning in loneliness and responsibility and the desperate need to just not feel so alone for 5 minutes. Daniel felt tears burning behind his eyes. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to be enough for Ruby. How to fill the space Grace left. How to wake up every morning and pretend I'm okay, when I'm just barely holding it together. You don't have to pretend, Daniel. Not with me. Something shifted in the kitchen, in the air between them, in the careful walls they'd both constructed around their wounded hearts. Daniel reached out instinctively, and Victoria met him halfway, and suddenly they were embracing. Two broken people holding each other up in the middle of a sunlit kitchen, while an 8-year-old girl sorted rocks upstairs. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was human. It was recognition. It was two souls finding unexpected refuge in shared understanding. When they finally pulled apart, both wiping discreetly at their eyes, Ruby's voice called down from upstairs. I'm ready. Come see my collection. Victoria smiled at Daniel, and he smiled back, and something fragile but real had been born between them. The weeks following that Saturday morning unfolded in ways Daniel never could have anticipated. Victoria didn't disappear back into her role as his distant boss. Instead, she became a steady, growing presence in his and Ruby's lives, carefully and respectfully weaving herself into their routine. It started small. Victoria texted midweek to ask how Ruby's Egypt poster had been received at school. When Ruby sent back a photo of herself holding the poster with a gold star sticker on it, Victoria responded with genuine excitement and an invitation to celebrate with ice cream that weekend. That ice cream trip became a visit to the Science Museum, which became a tradition of Sunday morning pancakes at Daniel's house, which became Victoria joining them for Ruby's soccer games, cheering louder than anyone else on the sidelines. At work, they maintained their professional dynamic, though Daniel noticed subtle changes. Victoria smiled at him more during meetings, and occasionally their eyes would meet across the conference room with shared understanding when someone made a complaint about a minor inconvenience. They had both survived real tragedy. Office politics seemed trivial in comparison. One evening, 3 weeks after the accidental text, Victoria invited Daniel and Ruby to her home for dinner. Daniel had never seen his boss's personal space, and he was surprised to find it warm and inviting rather than the austere minimalist showcase he'd imagined. Photos of Victoria and her late husband adorned the walls, and a golden retriever named Chester greeted them at the door with enthusiastic tail wags. Ruby fell instantly in love with Chester, and Victoria laughed as the dog licked the girl's face while she giggled uncontrollably. He doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly, Victoria observed. You must be special, Ruby. Throughout dinner, Daniel watched Victoria interact with his daughter with growing wonder. She asked Ruby about her friends at school, her favorite subjects, what she wanted to be when she grew up. She listened with genuine interest, never patronizing or dismissive, treating Ruby like a whole person whose thoughts and feelings mattered. After Ruby fell asleep on Victoria's couch, exhausted from playing with Chester, the two adults found themselves on the back patio, wine glasses in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Thank you for this," Daniel said quietly. "For everything these past few weeks. You've given Ruby something I couldn't. Another adult who cares about her. Especially a woman. She needs that." Victoria turned to him, her expression serious in the fading light. "I'm not trying to replace Grace, Daniel. I would never presume to do that. I know," he assured her quickly. "That's not what I meant. It's just that Ruby lost her mother at such a young age, and I've been so focused on being both parents that I didn't realize how much she might need another feminine presence in her life. Someone who can relate to her in ways I can't." Victoria smiled softly. "She's an incredible kid. You've done an amazing job with her." "I don't feel like I have," Daniel admitted, the wine loosening his tongue. "Most days I feel like I'm failing her in 1,000 small ways. I can't braid her hair properly. I don't understand the social dynamics of 8-year-old girls. I panic when she asks me questions about her changing body, because that was supposed to be Grace's department. You're human, Daniel. You're doing your best in an impossible situation. Ruby knows she's loved, and that's what matters most." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Finally, Victoria spoke again, her voice carrying a weight of confession. "I should tell you something. When Thomas died, I made a decision. I decided that I would never let anyone get close to me again. Never risk that kind of pain. I threw myself into building the firm, working 80-hour weeks, becoming the ice queen everyone whispered about. It was easier than feeling anything." Daniel turned to look at her profile in the twilight, waiting for her to continue. "But these past few weeks with you and Ruby," Victoria went on, "have reminded me what it feels like to be part of something, to care about people beyond professional obligation, to laugh genuinely, to feel connected to life instead of just moving through it." She finally met his eyes, and Daniel saw vulnerability there that took his breath away. "I'm scared, Daniel. I'm terrified actually, because I feel myself caring about you both. And that means I'm opening myself up to loss again. But I also know that closing myself off, staying safe in my lonely apartment with my work and my dog, that's not really living either." Daniel reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand. His heart pounded, but he held her gaze steadily. "I'm scared too, terrified, because I haven't felt anything for anyone since Grace died. And now when I see you, I feel something, and it makes me feel guilty and excited and confused all at once." Victoria's fingers tightened around his. "What do we do with this?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe we just keep doing what we're doing, taking it one day at a time, and see where it leads." They sat together in the growing darkness, hands clasped, both afraid and hopeful. Two wounded souls testing whether they might heal better together than apart. Inside, Ruby stirred on the couch, and Chester lifted his head to watch over her. And in that moment, something that looked remarkably like family was taking shape. The following months brought a deepening of their connection. Victoria became a fixture at Daniel's dinner table, sometimes cooking meals that reminded Ruby of dishes her mother used to make. Daniel found himself calling Victoria when Ruby was struggling with homework or friend drama, and her advice was always thoughtful and practical. They went to pumpkin patches in October, carved jack-o'-lanterns on Daniel's porch, while Ruby directed their artistic efforts with the seriousness of a museum curator. They took Chester and Ruby to the dog park, laughing as the retriever bounded through fallen leaves with Ruby racing beside him. Daniel's mother-in-law, Patricia, who had remained close after Grace's death, met Victoria at a family Sunday dinner. Daniel had been nervous about the meeting, worried that Patricia might see Victoria as a replacement for her daughter. But the older woman had surprised him. After dinner, Patricia pulled Daniel aside in the kitchen. "She's good for you both," she said simply. Grace would approve. Daniel felt tears spring to his eyes. "You really think so?" Patricia cupped his face gently, the way she used to when he and Grace were newlyweds. "Sweetheart, Grace loved you more than anything. She would want you to find happiness again, especially with someone who clearly loves Ruby as much as Victoria does. Don't torture yourself with guilt over moving forward." At work, their colleagues began to notice the connection between them, though Daniel and Victoria were careful to maintain professionalism. Still, there were knowing looks when Victoria defended Daniel's design proposal with particular passion, or when Daniel brought Victoria her favorite coffee order without being asked. One December evening, after Ruby had gone to bed, Daniel and Victoria sat by his fireplace, the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner. They had spent the day decorating together, Ruby insisting that Victoria had to place the star on top because she was the tallest. "I have something to tell you," Victoria said suddenly, setting down her mug of hot chocolate. Daniel's heart leapt with sudden anxiety. "Okay." She turned to face him fully, tucking one leg beneath her. "I'm falling in love with you, Daniel, with you and with Ruby. And I need you to know that, because I can't keep pretending this is just friendship anymore." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Daniel felt his breath catch. He thought of Grace, of the guilt he'd carried 4 months over the feelings growing in his heart for Victoria. He thought of Ruby, who had started calling Victoria her special friend and asked almost daily when they would see her next. He thought of the emptiness that had defined his life for 3 years, and how Victoria had helped fill it with warmth and light and possibility. Daniel reached out and took Victoria's hands in his, feeling them tremble slightly despite her brave words. "I've been trying not to fall in love with you," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been telling myself it's too soon, that I'm betraying Grace's memory, that I don't deserve to be happy again when she never got that chance." Victoria squeezed his hands, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But the truth is," Daniel continued, "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have. You've brought life back into this house, back into Ruby, back into me, and I'm tired of fighting it out of misplaced guilt." He lifted one hand to cup her face gently. "Grace was the love of my first life. You're becoming the love of my second, and I don't think those two truths have to contradict each other." Victoria out a shaky breath, leaning into his touch. "I was so afraid you'd say it was too complicated, or that you weren't ready." "I'm terrified," Daniel admitted, "but I'm more afraid of losing what we've found together by being too scared to claim it." They sat there for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, before Daniel finally closed a distance and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative at first, both of them aware of the significance of this threshold they were crossing. But then Victoria's arms wound around his neck and Daniel pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and hope and the promise of healing. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "That was worth waiting for," Victoria whispered. Daniel laughed softly. "I was beginning to think we'd dance around this forever." They spent the rest of the evening talking about what this meant, what they wanted their relationship to look like. They agreed to take things slowly, especially for Ruby's sake. Victoria would continue to be a steady presence in their lives, but they would be mindful about how they presented their romantic relationship to an 8-year-old girl still processing the loss of her mother. But children are more perceptive than adults give them credit for. 2 weeks later, over breakfast on a Saturday morning, Ruby looked between Daniel and Victoria with knowing eyes. "Are you and Victoria girlfriend-boyfriend now, Daddy?" Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. Victoria blushed but met Ruby's gaze steadily. Both adults had agreed to be honest with Ruby when the moment came, but they hadn't expected it quite so soon or quite so directly. "Would that be okay with you if we were?" Daniel asked carefully. Ruby considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Does that mean Victoria will be here more?" "Yes, Probably Dot and Chester too. Definitely Chester too. Victoria added. Ruby nodded thoughtfully. Will you still love Mama if you love Victoria? Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. He knelt beside Ruby's chair, taking her small hands in his. Sweetheart, I will always love your Mama, always. She gave me you, and she was my best friend, and nothing will ever change that. He glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. But people's hearts are amazing things. They can hold love from more than one person. Loving Victoria doesn't mean I love Mama any less. It means my heart grew bigger to make room for someone new. Ruby processed this, her brow furrowed in concentration. Like how I love Mama, but I also love Grandma Patricia, and I love my friends, and I love Victoria and Chester. Exactly like that. Daniel confirmed, relief flooding through him. Okay then, Ruby declared with the finality of a judge's gavel. You can be girlfriend, boyfriend, but Victoria has to come to my dance recital next month, and Chester needs a playdate with my friend Hannah's dog. Victoria laughed, tears streaming down her face. I wouldn't miss your dance recital for anything in the world. The months that followed were a period of adjustment and growth for all three of them. Victoria officially became Daniel's girlfriend, and they navigated the balance between their relationship and their shared commitment to Ruby's well-being. There were challenges, moments of doubt and guilt that crept in unexpectedly. Times when Daniel looked at Grace's photo and had to reassure himself that moving forward wasn't betrayal. Victoria never tried to replace Grace or erase her memory. Instead, she honored it, asking Ruby to tell her stories about her mother, looking at old photo albums together, keeping Grace's presence alive in the household. On the anniversary of Grace's death, Victoria helped Ruby and Daniel plant a cherry tree in the backyard in Grace's memory. Patricia became one of Victoria's biggest champions, inviting her to family dinners and confiding in her about Grace's childhood. I see how you love them, she told Victoria one afternoon over tea. That's all a mother could ask for. At work, Daniel and Victoria eventually disclosed their relationship to HR, as policy required. Some eyebrows were raised, but Victoria's position and Daniel's talent protected them from serious workplace drama. Besides, everyone agreed that Victoria seemed happier, more approachable, than she had been in years. 1 year after the accidental text message that had started everything, Daniel decided it was time. He bought a ring, a simple but elegant design that reminded him of Victoria's understated grace. He planned an elaborate proposal at the Botanical Gardens, where they had taken Ruby for her 9th birthday. But life had other plans. The proposal happened instead on a random Tuesday evening. Ruby was at a sleepover, and Daniel and Victoria were cooking dinner together, dancing around the kitchen to old jazz music. Laughing as Victoria tried to teach him proper cooking techniques, he stubbornly ignored as they moved together in that familiar, comfortable rhythm. Daniel suddenly realized that this was the moment. Not a grand gesture in a beautiful location, but this, the ordinary magic of loving someone in the everyday moments. He turned off the stove, pulled Victoria close, and said simply, "Marry me." Victoria's eyes widened. What, now? Don't you want to wait for the right moment? This is the right moment, Daniel said, producing the ring from his pocket, where he'd been carrying it for 2 weeks. Waiting for the perfect time that turned out to be right now. You in my kitchen, teaching me how not to burn dinner. Chester stealing scraps from the counter. Ruby's artwork on the fridge. This life we've built together from the pieces of our broken ones. This is perfect. Victoria's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Daniel dropped to one knee on his kitchen floor, holding up the ring. Victoria Ashford, you showed up at my door when I needed someone most. You loved my daughter like she was your own. You taught me that hearts can heal and grow and love again. Will you marry me and make this accidental family permanent? Yes, Victoria sobbed, pulling him to his feet and kissing him hard. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They called Ruby at her sleepover to share the news, and her squeals of excitement were so loud that Victoria's friend had to hold the phone away from her ear. "We're going to be a real family," Ruby shouted. "Can Chester be my brother?" The wedding took place 6 months later in a small ceremony at the same church where Daniel and Grace had married years before. Patricia walked Victoria down the aisle, and Ruby served as their flower girl and ring bearer, taking her dual duties with utmost seriousness. During their vows, Daniel spoke directly from his heart. "I thought my story ended when I lost Grace, but you taught me that life doesn't end, it transforms. You showed me that opening my heart again wasn't betrayal, but courage. Thank you for seeing past my grief to the man I could become." Victoria's vows were equally moving. "You sent me an accidental text message on a dark night, but I believe the universe doesn't make mistakes. I believe we were meant to find each other, to broken people who could help each other heal. Thank you for letting me love you. Love Ruby. Love this beautiful life we're creating together." At the reception, Patricia gave a toast that left few dry eyes in the room. "To Grace," she said, raising her glass, who taught Daniel what love looked like, and to Victoria, who reminded him that love can come twice in a lifetime, and to all of us, may we have the courage to embrace unexpected blessings when they arrive, even in the form of wrong number texts. Daniel and Victoria's first dance was to a slow, romantic song that Ruby had helped pick out. As they swayed together, Victoria whispered in his ear, "I'm so glad you texted the wrong person that night." Daniel pulled back to look into her eyes. This woman who had transformed his life. "Actually, I think I texted exactly the right person. The universe just had to trick me into doing it." Later, as they cut the cake with Ruby bouncing excitedly beside them, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From devastating loss to accidental connection, to tentative friendship to deep love, life had taken everything from him once, and then, through a simple mistake, had given him a second chance at happiness. Ruby tugged on his jacket. "Daddy, Victoria, can we go home now? Chester's probably missing us." Victoria laughed and ruffled Ruby's hair. "Soon, sweetheart, but first, we have our family dance." The DJ had announced it, and Ruby ran onto the dance floor as the opening notes of their chosen song began to play. Daniel and Victoria joined her, the three of them dancing together, laughing as Ruby spun between them, Chester watching from the sidelines with what could only be described as a doggy smile. In that moment, surrounded by friends and family, dancing with his daughter and his new wife, Daniel felt complete in a way he hadn't thought possible 3 years ago. Grace would always be part of his story, the foundation of who he was as a father and a man, but Victoria was his future, his second chance, his proof that love could bloom from the ashes of grief. Sometimes the greatest gifts in life come wrapped in mistakes. Sometimes a wrong number is exactly the right number. Sometimes showing up on someone's doorstep with coffee is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes the broken pieces of two lives can fit together to create something beautiful and whole and full of hope. As the song ended and Ruby demanded another dance, Daniel caught Victoria's eye across their daughter's head. She smiled at him, that soft, knowing smile that said everything words couldn't. They had both been lost, drowning in grief and loneliness, but they had found each other, and in doing so, had found their way back to life. The reception continued late into the night, filled with laughter and joy and the promise of tomorrow. Daniel danced with Patricia, who told him through happy tears that he had honored her daughter's memory by choosing to live fully again. He danced with Ruby, who whispered that she thought Mama would really like Victoria. He danced with Victoria, his wife now, his partner, his second chance at forever. When they finally left the reception, rice and flower petals raining down on them, Chester barking excitedly from the back seat where Ruby was already half asleep, Daniel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be moments of grief and doubt and adjustment, but they would face it together, a family built not by blood or traditional circumstances, but by choice and love and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. Life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes we lose people we can't imagine living without. Sometimes we send messages to the wrong person, but sometimes those mistakes turn out to be the universe's way of guiding us exactly where we need to be, to the people who will help us heal, to the love we didn't know was waiting for us, to the life we were always meant to live. And sometimes, just sometimes, a single misdirected text on a dark and lonely night can change absolutely everything.